Hi, everyone. Welcome to week 10 of our EDCI 430 course. This week, we're going to be focusing on the next section of your management plan. You should feel pretty comfortable with the diversity section of your management plan and all the way through to that point. So if you don't, please go back and revisit some of the prior weeks where we talked about different sections of the management plan, and just revisit each section and make sure that everything through the diversity section feels pretty tight. If you have any questions about anything, please feel free to send me a paragraph of what you put in each section or one particular section that's giving you trouble, and I can definitely send you feedback. This week, we'll focus on the restorative motivational practices section of your management plan. So as you watch this video, I encourage you to have that open on the side so that you can take notes and jot down any ideas that you might get while we're talking. So this week, restorative motivational practices and also a restorative versus punitive school-wide approach. So we'll give you some examples to kind of visualize what we're talking about when we compare restorative versus punitive. And if you remember, earlier on in the semester, you listened to a podcast about restorative practices brought to you by a principal who uses these practices in his school. So just recall that information, and we're just going to dig a little deeper into that as you put together the restorative motivational practices section of your management plan. So this week's thought question is, what is the difference between punitive and restorative practices? So for this week, we're just thinking about this. If you think about the word punitive, what word do you hear? We hear the word punish. And if we think about the word restorative, we hear the word restore. The main difference between punitive and restorative is that punitive is more about the punishment. It's about breaking a rule and being punished for it, versus breaking a rule, doing something wrong, but the efforts that come after are not so much a punishment, but more about what do we need to do to repair the relationship that harm was done, where harm was done. So this is where you'll see things like, kind of treating kids like we would treat adults. If I punch someone or say things that are really hurtful, as an adult, what do I have to do to repair that relationship, to repair the harm that was done? That's really the consequence. It's not that I have to move my clip and miss recess. That's a punishment. And I don't know how that really teaches me not to cause that harm again. Maybe it teaches me that I get punished for it. I don't like my punishment, but does it really get to the root cause of why I caused that harm in the first place? And am I teaching? Am I as the person who caused harm really learning from someone on how to improve on that? This is a quote from Frederick Douglass, and this is actually on the very first chapter of the Carrots and Sticks books, which we're starting to read now. It says, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." So just stop and think about that quote for a second, read it a couple times and let that sink in. I think this quote is really powerful for us as teachers because we really are in a position of power to build strong children so that they can go out as men, women into the world and be strong and prepared to be able to function, to be able to thrive, to be able to have relationships, to be able to resolve conflict, to be able to problem solve. So we have a lot of power in our teaching positions to be able to build those strong children rather than breaking them down so that one day we're trying to repair broken adults. So I think this is a really powerful way to start off the first chapter of Better Than Carrots or Sticks. So speaking about kind of the definitions of restorative practices, you'll notice in your management plan that the first line says as humans, we are hardwired to connect. This is really true. And so restorative practices kind of reminds us about the importance of solid, functioning relationships and how we can actually teach kids how to build those relationships and maintain those relationships. So we'll watch this brief overview video describing restorative practices as the science of relationships and community.
Our world is changing at a breathtaking pace. Social patterns that have long characterized human life are changing dramatically around the globe, diminishing social bonds within families, schools, workplaces, and communities. But humans are hardwired to connect. Just as we need food, shelter, and clothing, we also need strong and meaningful relationships to thrive. With all of this in mind, what is restorative practices? Restorative practices is an emerging social science that studies how to strengthen relationships between individuals and within communities. When put into practice, the effects are profound. In schools, students experience greater safety and sense of belonging, resulting in improved behavior, less bullying, and less violence. In workplaces, leaders facilitate direct communication among staff and address conflict as it arises. The result is higher performance, greater accountability, and effective collaboration. In criminal justice, new options allow victims and offenders, friends and family, to repair the emotional harm caused by crime. Throughout our neighborhoods, restorative practices give regular people more voice in the issues that matter most. In a nutshell, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. Your individual daily interactions have a big impact on the world around you, at your job, with young people, and throughout your community. How we relate matters. This video was brought to you by the International Institute for Restorative Practices.
Okay, so what does that mean for your classroom? What does it look like to have a classroom, a community of restorative practices? And what does this look like in a school? So they used examples of the criminal justice system, of workplaces. So this goes far beyond schools, but we're really thinking about it in context of how do you run your classroom as a community that looks out for one another, that helps to manage the classroom, that takes pride in their classroom? And how do you also encourage strong relationships between kids and teachers, between teacher and parents, all around? What does this really mean for your classroom environment and your motivational strategies? So here's a great article that talks about a tale of two schools. And I think this is relatable, whether it's in a positive way that it's relatable or a negative way. I think that you'll find some relation to this. So let's imagine this kid, his name is Carlos. Carlos has a heated argument with his parents before leaving for school. I mean, we've all had those moments. We just have a rough morning. Maybe there's an argument. Maybe they couldn't find his shoes, or, we're missing a permission slip. Who knows what happened? But there's some kind of argument before leaving for school. And so they're running late. Let's see the difference that restorative policies and practices can make versus a zero tolerance punitive approach to an education system. So on the top level, or let's go with the bottom first. Carlos arrives at school into his zero tolerance education system. He is greeted by metal detectors and a police search. He walks into his classroom, his teacher scolds him in front of the class. Carlos talks back and is given a detention. A school police officer detains and arrests. Let's go down the middle row. So we're here first. Carlos arrives at school. He is greeted by metal detectors and a police search. Then he's late for his first period. His teacher fusses at him. Carlos talks back. He's already in a bad mood. He gets detention. In the cafeteria at lunch, Carlos gets into a minor altercation in the cafeteria. A school police officer detains and arrests both students. Later that afternoon, Carlos is held in a juvenile detention facility all afternoon, missing school. He now has an arrest record and is facing suspension. So this is a pretty extreme case. But think back to your middle and high school experience. And, did you ever witness anything like this where maybe it didn't lead to an arrest? Maybe it did, but maybe it just led to a detention or a suspension, which ultimately, what are kids doing when they're in there? Are they learning coping mechanisms? Are they learning how to resolve conflict? Are they getting to better understand why they're so angry? Or are they just missing class and sitting in a room as a punishment? If we go on the flip side of this scenario, same situation, Carlos is running late for school because there was a heated argument with his parents. In a restorative practices-based system, Carlos arrives at school. The teachers and administrators welcome him and his fellow students as they enter. Carlos is late to his first period of class. His teacher waits until after class to speak with Carlos to learn more and sets up a meeting with his school counselor. Carlos then gets into the same minor altercation in the cafeteria. Students, peer media mentors, and support staff intervene. Student peer mediators and support staff intervene. Have the students sit down together and de-escalate the situation. And then finally, later that afternoon, we know this is a problem. So Carlos and the other student agreed to help clean the cafeteria during a free period. Carlos meets with his counselor and parents after school to help resolve the conflicts at home. So what this is showing you is that in one situation, punishment is the answer. We're punishing. And, in some ways, punishment and fear of punishment may lead to changed behavior. Is any of it really getting to the root cause? Probably not. So in a restorative classroom, it does not mean that you are not holding kids accountable for unacceptable behavior. It just means that you're using it as more of a teaching mechanism to teach them how to handle those situations in the future, which I would argue is not being done in a zero tolerance punitive system. So this typical day is a little bit different, just a little more tailored for a younger age, but very similar in the scenario. So please feel free to pause the video here and read some of these examples. The whole idea is that if we just take the situation of the child being late for school, first of all, a child who is not driving that's not their fault necessarily if they're late for school. And so we don't want to start off the day by taking it out on them. Just by a child entering into your classroom late and greeting them by name, telling them good morning, and looking them in the eyes and saying, I'm glad you're here, can completely reverse the kid's day, as opposed to get out and go to the office for a tardy slip. They may still have to go to the office for a tardy slip, but before you tell them that, you greeted them by name, let them know that you were glad that they were here, and just said, run real quick and get that tardy slip. It's not a big deal. I know it's not your fault, but just run to the office real quick for that tardy slip. That can automatically change the whole tone and change, in this case, Ryan's mindset, so that maybe those other red dots down the line wouldn't even happen, because we were able to kind of reverse the tone of the day right from the start. So it's time now to start reading your Carrots and Sticks book, the second book for this course. And we are on chapter 1, which is called Punitive or Restorative, The Choice is Yours. So please take the next week to read that chapter 1 and highlight 3 powerful quotes that you think would influence your teaching practice. Okay, so let's see what these things look like in action. This is a brief video about restorative management practices in action in a school. As you're watching this, please take notes in that restorative motivational section of your management plan. And also think about what kinds of classroom activities, specific examples of classroom activities that you can use, and also things that you would hope that your school as a whole would adopt.
Wasn't a new family coming into Callaway, they would see that we are different in terms of how we are going to greet you, how we're going to embrace you.
Students, good morning. Be reminded that we are respectful and that we treat each other the way we want to be treated.
Here at Callaway, we've talked a lot about what a restorative community looks like. One of the main aspects of that is students knowing that they have a voice, students knowing that they can speak to a problem that they may have and know that they can come to somebody to be able to solve that problem.
Children need that. They need that time to be able to process what's going on in their lives. They're little people, but they're dealing with adult issues. To me, restorative practices helps these children to deal with everyday issues. If I had to describe what a restorative community looks like, I would say that it is one that engages each of the individuals and tries to meet them where their needs are.
Sometimes something can happen at home or can happen at school where a kid may have a conflict and they need it resolved.
We're teaching respect, we're teaching patience, we're teaching turn-taking skills on just so many different levels in helping the kids to work with one another.
Today, we're going to be discussing a topic about friendship.
The first thing I think of when I think of restorative practices in the classroom is circles. Circles are amazing.
When I sit in a circle with my classmates, It feels like I am open and I have my own chance to have my opinion. We share what we do at home, what we like to do at school. You get to share your emotions about different things. And you also get to talk about like if you're in a bad mood or you have a problem, you could form a circle and then just talk about that problem.
When I think of accountability in restorative practice circles, one thing I like to think about is when a student is being accountable, they recognize what they've done and how they've made someone else feel as a result of what they've done. It's important for two things to happen. One, that the student who is in the wrong is able to understand that they've done something wrong, and for them to understand that they can get beyond it.
We always want to hold students accountable for their behavior. What we want to make sure that they know and understand is how they've impacted the community that they're in.
Sorry about that. Somebody just walked in. Let's start where we left off.
We're a school where we make every attempt not to be punitive, to give the student the opportunity to make the right decision, to undo their wrongs and make them right, and not so much by telling them to do it, but letting them come to the conclusion that this is the right thing to do.
The impact that we've seen over the years with restorative practices has been one where we've seen students make better choices over time. Students that have engaged in those practices with us and have learned about making better choices and engaging in the cycle of problem solving have over time made better choices.
What we have found that truly is exciting is there has been a real transformation. After just a few months, the first year where they really focused on implementing in a big way, we were hearing from teachers, the school feels different. We walk in, it's calmer. There's less shouting and screaming in the hallway, fewer fights happening, and certainly suspensions truly went down.
I think when students are used to hearing thoughts that they don't agree with all the time, they're not as overwhelmed to hear something new because they're in this constant practice of hearing things from a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives. Students are a lot more likely to be open to their classmates and their teachers, as opposed to just feeling closed off. It's about learning and changing and being willing to change.
Restorative practices has taken some time to take root at Callaway Elementary School, as it does in all of our schools. It's not an overnight fix. It's a process. We call it a restorative journey.
It's a continuing journey. Kids come in every year. I think one of the biggest challenges with restorative practice is when you have your set community of kids and a new person has to enter into the group, and just trying to get them accustomed and understanding how we do things. We sometimes acquire students who have been maybe behavioral issues at other schools. We're talking about children who live in areas where they're taught, someone hits you, hit them back.
Instead of letting that student come into the school and change their culture, the students at the school let that student know, this is how we resolve conflicts here. And they pull them in a positive way.
It's not fist first. That can't be our first rationale. We have to be able to use our words. We have to be able to communicate with each other.
Our community needs to know that it takes a village to raise a child, and this mindset of being restorative with students, it's going to take a change, and it's going to take the community as a whole owning how we resolve issues with one another.
Coping skills, social functioning, that all comes down to the whole restorative practice, because these are the tools that we need the kids to have so that they can grow up and be functioning adults. Children should be happy, children should feel safe, and all of those great things that I think children should experience, and especially in school.
I love seeing the confidence build in students slowly And it makes me feel happy that it's not because of me. It's because something intrinsic and something that they built for themselves, and that me taking a step back allowed them to take a step up.
I love how that ends with me taking a step back allows them to take a step up. I really like that idea. So when we think about what this looks like in action, some things that you might include in your motivational practices section, if you want to put like bullets of concrete things that you can do in your classroom, here are a few of them that you might like. You're also going to read about a lot of them in the Better Than Carrots or Sticks book as well. The first one is community circles, which you saw in the video. These are used for community building at the beginning of the year, developing empathy for others. Like some of those teachers shared, the kids are used to hearing about things, and so they're kind of become more of a support system for each other. They check in on each other. And so these can be used as like a morning meeting every day. It can be used a morning meeting every Monday, just a quick check-in after the weekend. Another one is norm setting. So this is kind of what we talked about at the beginning of semester about establishing expectations together by first starting with what are the goals that you have for yourself for your school year? And if we have all of these goals, then how do we establish expectations together so that we can all get to our goals together? It's the same idea. We're establishing norms that we all agree upon, which you saw in the video on the board, to ensure that we all can commit to those and hold each other accountable for those. Another one is discussion circles. So this has to do more about whenever you're teaching content knowledge, you can also have those circles form again, just like you do with community circles, where you're having classrooms discuss specific content in a community building form. So they're talking, maybe they're disagreeing respectfully with each other. Maybe they're grappling with issues that don't have one correct answer, but you're doing it in a discussion circle so that you're community building within teaching of new content. Restorative chats are kind of what you see in the picture here, is that when a conflict occurs, you're going to kind of help facilitate a restorative chat. These do not have to take hours long. They can take 5 minutes sometimes. They can take 1 minute sometimes. But what you're doing is you're stopping when the conflict occurs and you're spending just a minute or two trying to facilitate a discussion. Maybe some of these may take a little bit longer, but basically the questions are, what happened? Not what did you do? The question is what happened? And this opens up the line for both parties to explain what happened in their point of view. What were you thinking at the time? Who or what was harmed? And how do you repair the harm? So again, the focus here is on what harm was done and how are we going to repair it? And then the last one here is called I messages. So these I messages are to help support conflict resolutions. Sometimes kids are not going to know what to say. They don't have the language yet to be able to say what they were thinking of the time or how are they going to repair the situation. So sometimes you can support them with these I messages where you can say, okay, finish my sentence. I feel blank. How do you feel right now? They might say angry or sad. Okay, so I feel sad when you blank. And then we're teaching kids how to use their words to describe to someone else how they felt when the other person did whatever the harm that was done. The other example here is I would like, or what I need is blank. So how, if we don't know how we're going to repair the harm, maybe the person who had the harm done to them can say, I would like for you to apologize, and I would like for you to never do that again. What we're doing with these sentence starters is we're kind of giving them the tools that they need to be able to formulate a full thought to communicate how we're going to resolve the conflict. So if we compare those kinds of strategies to some of the more traditional strategies, it kind of stretches our thinking a little bit on how we've used behavior management systems in the past. So if we look at like the clip chart in the middle, you've probably seen these in millions of classrooms. What are the pros and cons of these types of motivational strategies? So traditionally, these top 3 sections were not part of a clip chart. The clip chart was simply green meant you're doing great. And then once you mess up, you drop down to yellow. Sometimes it means that you miss recess. maybe it's 10 minutes of recess. Then if you drop down to orange, it means you missed 20 minutes of recess. And if you drop down to red, you get a phone call home and you go to the principal's office. Traditionally, students were just punished in this way. They were never really given opportunities to climb back up the ladder, to redeem themselves. At least with this new take on a clip chart, kids start in the middle. They're neutral. Every day is a fresh day, and they can move up. This gives me an opportunity to acknowledge even kids who are consistent, show consistent behavioral issues. If they do something right, if they do something positive, I get a chance to show them a little taste of what that positive intrinsic feedback feels like whenever they're intrinsically motivated to continue to do well, because they're being acknowledged in a positive way and not only in negative ways. So there's a lot of information out there about the positives and negatives of clip charts. I personally found it helpful to start the year with some extrinsic motivators. So that means, you know, a sticker, a Skittle for those working quietly, clips, physically moving my clip up or down a chart. But my goal was always to move my first graders from the idea that these extrinsic motivators what was motivating them to do good things. I wanted them to feel intrinsically motivated and do it just because that's what they wanted to do. So we really only used the clip chart for the first maybe month or two as we worked our way toward more of the just all-encompassing motivational practices that that make more sense and are more aligned to kind of what we do as adults, how we motivate ourselves as adults. And then the second picture is a box of warm fuzzies. So I've shared with you the book, Have You Filled a Bucket Today?, where they talk about filling a bucket by doing kind things for others. So some teachers use a little bucket on each group of tables. So imagine that you have, 4 to 6 kids kind of in a grouping of desks. You would just have one small bucket on their group. And so this is kind of rewarding groups of people, or even if there's one student who's really on task or answering the question well, or whatever it is, you can still offer rewards, but it's in more of a group approach. So it's not as individualized. What are the pros and cons of this scenario? There are pros and cons to a lot of these more traditional approaches. It doesn't make them bad. I'm just asking that we kind of look critically at these and say, but what are we ultimately working toward, even if we still have to start with extrinsic motivators like clip charts or little pom-poms or, a Skittle every now and then? How are we really focusing on self-evaluation and self-goal setting to hopefully inspire intrinsic motivation whenever they leave us and we're finished with the school year? So here's the write-up in your management plan about restorative motivational practices. In the top section, you're going to write a narrative that you can leave the first sentence if that makes sense to you. This is kind of what restorative motivational practices is about. The idea that humans are hardwired to connect with others. We need relationships in our lives, and we need a sense of community and belonging. So the rest of this narrative section is really just you sort of painting a picture for how you plan to approach bringing restorative motivational practices into your classroom. Below that in the bullets, I'm asking you for specifics. That all sounds great up there, but now let's drill down into, but how are you actually going to pull it off? So you're going to give me 2 or 3 ideas under each one of those. Whole class motivational strategies. So for the whole class, then how are you going to focus more on individuals? And then finally, how are you going to encourage students to set their own goals and to monitor their progress? So to help with this, I like to think of 2 people who have come up with some really interesting ideas that I think contribute to early education all the way up through adulthood. The first one is the idea of what drives professionals. And really, when we think of the word drive, like if I'm driven to do something great, then that means that I'm intrinsically motivated. I might be driven by money. I might be driven by power or a prize at the end. Those would still be extrinsic motivators. But when we're talking about developing professional drive in this sense, we're really talking about what are the things that exist in people who are intrinsically motivated to do great things in their profession. And so Daniel Pink really breaks this down into 3 components. What motivates people is purpose. So they have the desire to do things in service of something larger than ourselves. Mastery is the desire to continually improve at something that matters to you. And then autonomy is the desire to direct our own lives. We can make our own decisions. We can make our own choices within whatever context we are, professionally employed in. And so I like to think about these words, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, in terms of you as a teacher, as a developing teacher. We can think, we want to have autonomy in the way that we run our classrooms and some of the decisions that we make for our kids. We have to stay connected to the purpose that brought us to education in the first place if we're going to find joy and drive and intrinsic motivation in our careers. And we should also be given the opportunities to continually improve our practice as teachers. We don't want to just kind of be stuck in the status quo. We only know what we know, and we're not going out there and trying to find other things. So what Daniel Pink found is that when these three, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, merge together, in that centerpiece is where we can find intrinsic motivation, our professional drive. So we don't only have to think about this as teachers, but also what does this mean for our kids? If we are trying to develop intrinsic motivation in kids, how can we learn from this model here? How can we make sure that our lessons have purpose and meaning to the interest of the real kids in our classroom? How can we ensure that all kids feel like they can continually improve? That means that the kid who's working at a frustration level is not understanding anything that we're talking about in our lesson to the whole group. They get what they need to continually improve for whatever that means for them. It also means that the kid who has already mastered all the content that we're teaching is also given opportunities to continually improve. So when we talk about mastery, it's just about the pursuit of continuous improvement. So it really just means growth. We want all kids to feel like they can continually grow. And then finally, autonomy. How are we ensuring that kids have some choice in what they're doing and feel like they kind of have some decision-making power in their own lives, in their own context, in their own classroom? The other thing I wanted to point out is the idea of growth mindset. You may have heard about this in some of your other classes. This is from Carol Dweck. And she basically is saying that we can have two types of mindsets. We can have a fixed mindset that says intelligence is static. This leads to a desire to look smart and therefore a tendency to avoid challenges. If I want to look smart and like I know everything, I'm going to be hesitant about taking on a challenge because I might look like a failure if I don't do it perfect the first time. It leads to giving up easily. When something seems hard, I'm going to give up because I don't want to appear to have failed by others. We see effort as fruitless, or worse, we ignore useful negative feedback, and we feel threatened by the success of others when we have a fixed mindset that intelligence is static. As a result, they may plateau early and achieve less than their full potential. On the other side of this diagram, we see the growth mindset, the idea that intelligence can be developed. This leads to a desire to learn and therefore a tendency to embrace challenges, persist in the face of setbacks, see effort as the path to mastery. We have to have effort to get mastery, and learn from criticism, and finally find lessons and inspiration in the success of others. As a result, they reach ever higher levels of achievement. We continually grow. So I hope those two things, this introduction of what the idea of drive and intrinsic motivation, and then growth mindset, you can kind of see how they fit into that restorative practices approach, is that we're teaching kids how to become intrinsically motivated just by the types of lessons and the type of classroom environment that we are setting up as the conditions in which they learn. So here are some more kind of concrete ideas of what you could use under those whole class motivational strategies, individual, and then finally the student goal setting. Under whole class motivational strategies, I already talked to you about the community circles idea for social emotional check-ins that can set the tone for the day. This might be a 5-minute morning meeting that just sets the tone. It gets them out of whatever environment they just left, and they are now in their safe and trusting community in your classroom that looks out for one another. It sets the tone for the day. You can create a classroom environment that reflects the tone of your lesson. If your lesson is playful and exciting, maybe there needs to be some noise. If they're creating something, if they're playing a game, consider the different noise levels as matching whatever they're doing. Maybe the kids come in from recess or lunch and they're tired and sweaty. Maybe you turn off the lights, turn some lamps on, put on some soft music, and have quiet reading time for 30 minutes. So just kind of feel the flow and function, feel the needs of your kids, and we're going to make classroom environment adjustments that match the tone of the lesson and match whatever the kids need in that moment. We can also call out positive behavior, find a way to systemize that. I love the way this table is working together. Things like that can oftentimes put other tables who may not be working together in more of an effort phase to get whatever they think that you want to see out of them. Just giving clear expectations at the beginning of assignments can eliminate some misbehavior. We can use role play to check for understanding. Can somebody explain to me what I just asked you to do? So what are you going to do when you go back to your desk? Okay, John, show me what exactly I just explained. How are you going to walk to your desk whenever I say go? By giving clear expectations and using role play to check for understanding, we can motivate kids to do what we expect of them because we were clear about it. And then finally, if we're just providing authentic, real learning experiences, a lot of times that gives the purpose to the lesson. Also, for offering some choice, that gives that autonomy piece. And so a lot of times that can be motivating just because we're connecting to a kid's personal interest or something that they really care about. And then finally, Class Dojo is a website that allows you to use nonverbal cues. So you would never show kids, it kind of keeps a point system on kids. Like if you see that the whole class is doing really great work and they're all on task, then you would just walk over to your computer and click on the thumbs up and it makes a sound like bing. And so the class gets a positive point. If everybody's kind of out of control, you can go and press the thumbs down and it makes like a boom sound. So it's a nonverbal cue to the class that like we need to get back on task. You can also use it for individual students, but what I like about it is that it's nonverbal and it also keeps track in a system where that you would never turn and show to kids. This is not a comparison or anything like that, but it's just something that keeps track of it for you. In the second column, it talks about individual motivational strategies. So how can you acknowledge students not only for acknowledging all the kids who got a perfect score on their test? How can we acknowledge when you notice a growth mindset over a fixed mindset? How can you acknowledge effort? How can you acknowledge progress and growth and not always acknowledge like proficiency, so they're not always acknowledging only the kids who get the 10 out of 10, but what about the kid who got a 1 out of 10 last week and got a 5 out of 10 this week? How can we acknowledge that growth and acknowledge the effort that he put in to be able to make that growth? And this can be in the same kind of traditional ways that we've acknowledged good behavior in the past. We're just switching, the actual things that we're acknowledging. We're trying to focus on the process of learning and calling out when we see hard work, effort, and growth. Also, we can involve students in setting and tracking their own goals. At the beginning of the semester, you explored how to engage kids in goal setting, asking them, what do you want to accomplish this year? How can I help you get there? What do you wish you could learn about? Those kinds of things automatically instill a sense of purpose in kids because they are actually playing a part in their own lives, which was under that piece of autonomy from Daniel Pink. Number 3, provide some choice in how and what they learn, as well as how they show what they know. This can motivate individual students because if I did an interest inventory at the beginning of the year and I learned that 3 of my students were obsessed with dinosaurs, then why not just throw some dinosaurs into your math word problems or into some of your lessons? Whenever we provide some choice and we relate our lessons to student interest, they're going to be better motivated to really show up for you. And along the same lines with the choice idea, if you want kids to prove sort of that they read a book at the end of the week, end of the month, how can you maybe offer a menu of options for how they're going to prove that? Maybe they could have an option of writing a book report, but maybe they could have the option of making a video, like commercial that pitches the idea of reading the book. Maybe they could create a book hook to present to their class. Maybe they could create a poster about the book. Maybe they could create a graphic organizer that tells the different parts of the story. So by offering a menu of options, we're building in that sense of autonomy and also a sense of purpose. And then finally, under student goal setting and self-monitoring, teachers can facilitate discussion with individual students to establish agreed upon goals. So let's think about those 1 or 2 kids who are just really struggling still. We've done all this great stuff, but we still just have those 1 or 2 that are consistent behavior problems. How can we sit down with them and have a conference where we are agreeing upon mutually decided upon goals? So I would say, I've just been noticing that we're having a lot of problems. I feel like every day I'm asking you to, not get out of your desk whenever we're working on this assignment, or I'm asking you to stop picking on so-and-so on the playground. I'm consistently hearing things about you calling somebody names, about you putting your hands on people. What are we going to do about this? What do you think some good goals are? Let's see if we can come up with 2. And we just want to nail down 2 goals that, you might want to have 10 goals, but we're going to narrow them down just to 2 goals that are mutually agreed upon between you and the student, where you can write those goals down and have the student self-monitor daily. In some cases, for me, I would have them self-monitor hourly. So at the end of math lesson, how do you think you did between a 0 and a 5? Sometimes they would say, I think I was a 3, and I was excited to say, oh, I think you were a 4. I think you did great today. You were a 4. Other times they would give themselves a 3, and I would say, well, I had to correct you 3 different times just now, and I saw you messing around with so-and-so sitting next to you. So I feel like we might need a 2, but I know you can do a 3 in the next hour. So it just gives us a way to kind of pinpoint individualized goals that the students were part of setting. That's extremely important. They have to play a role in figuring out what those goals are. And then they also have to play a role in self-monitoring. If I just gave them a score, this would not be as effective. We have to talk to them about it and talk through why we think that's the score that they've earned. The second thing is that students can keep track of their own progress daily or weekly in the behavior charts, as well as things like reading fluency. So if you're tracking the number of words per minute that your first graders are reading, why can't they go in and color in their bar graph? So, I would read with my first graders, and then we would check their fluency, and then they were thrilled to be able to go back and color in their bar graph to see how much growth, how much progress they had made. And then but that was between just me and the student. They would fill it out in their little manila folder and then close it up and put it away in their seat sacks. And that was not to be shared with anyone else, because it was individual goal setting and individual self-monitoring. And finally, teachers can hold quarterly goal conferences with students. So if we check in once per quarter, if that's our goal, we're going to revisit those goals that we set at the beginning of the year and just say, how are we doing with this one? Do you want to update your goal? Do you want to stick with the same goal? And what can I do to support you? And then finally, in the picture, you'll see sometimes individual motivational strategies are as simple as eye contact, positive feedback, building relationships, and things as simple as just giving a high five. Okay, so we've reached the checklist part of today. Please make sure that you are reading Better Than Carrots or Sticks, Chapter 1, and identify 3 powerful quotes that stand out to you for part of our class next week. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and do your teacher and student interviews and check Moodle for that due date. Please complete those student and teacher interviews as soon as possible. And finally, go ahead and complete the Restorative Motivational Practices section of your management plan. So that's the part that I just showed you earlier, and you should have plenty of information here. Take anything that we talked about today in this class and add it into your Restorative Motivational Practices, but you are also absolutely free always to go and explore your own resources on it and bring in any external resources that you need. Okay, thanks for listening, and I'll see y'all next week.